Welcome to Calming the Chaos, where I help you find peace in a chaotic world. I'm Tracy Canella, licensed mental health counselor who talks about chaos from a mental health perspective. And I give you self-help resources you can use to calm your chaos in any situation in this world. Isn't this fun? It's not a substitute for counseling or psychotherapy, but just a lot of helpful hints and tools. So if you're on board, feel free to tune in. And now, let the chaos begin. In this episode of Calming the Chaos, I continue the discussion about May of 2025 being Mental Health Awareness Month. And with that, we are going to hear a story from my guest today, Tyler Kania, and he is going to tell about bipolar disorder. Now, if you've watched my last video about mental health conditions, bipolar disorder is one of those conditions, characterized by extremely high mood or mania and extremely low mood, which is depression. So manic depression is some other term we used to call it way back when, and now it's bipolar 1 or bipolar 2. So without getting too much into the weeds and geeking out over mental health stuff, I am going to present Tyler, and he is going to tell his story and also tell you about his book. His memoir is called The Maniac with No Knees, and it's a really compelling story. I would like to say, though, with this interview and with his book, I'm going to do a slight trigger warning if you are sensitive to topics of suicidality. So right now, I'm going to bring up Tyler Kania. Welcome to Calming the Chaos.
Hey, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Nice. I'm really, really glad that you're here because a lot of the mental health conditions that I listed in my last video, I didn't really give a lot of examples about stories of people struggling with them. And so it's super cool that you are here to give us your story and as much of it as you want to, and tell us a little bit about your book.
Bipolar leads someone to live a pretty, roller coaster type life. And so there's a lot of adventures that I went on. There's a lot of, plates into, mania or depression. But, I grew up in a wealthy house, white, educated, nuclear, small town. The only restaurant was at the car dealership in Connecticut. And, I was the I was the captain of my high school football team. It was an inner city school. It was called Heroin Town, USA by 60 Minutes, and was the lowest ranked high school in the state of Connecticut. But I really enjoyed my time there. And I think that I learned more about different cultures and people that didn't have things that I had than, anyone would learn at a wealthy prep school or something like that. So I was thankful for, that experience. And I went to college at Central Connecticut State University. I played rugby. I was the fly half, which is basically the quarterback. I controlled the passing, kicking, play calling, everything. Our team was really good. We won 3 conference championships, and I was recruited to play on a premier rugby team that had guys from Team USA and stars from around the world like Fiji and Australia. At the time, there was no Major League Rugby in America, so this was kind of the cream of the crop as far as I was concerned. But when I was 24, I ruptured my patellar tendon. This is a really rare injury. It happens once for every 147,000 human years. And it would later happen to me a second time, which, it just has crazy odds. But that first occasion sent me down into my first experience with mania. And, I quit my job. I was working a 6-figure job in cybersecurity sales. I quit that. I quit rugby I was broken up with, and I moved to Idaho, where I helped my friend build a canoe that he was going to paddle from Montana to the Gulf of Mexico. I had a lot of adventures out west, stayed out there for a couple months, nearly died in the Grand Canyon trying to go rim to rim to rim with a bum knee. And, I ended up getting a job back in Connecticut, and I, found a lot of success right away. I was making $250,000 at the age of 26. And, what monetary wealth kind of had supplanted the position that rugby gave as my primary confidence booster in life. And I moved to Boston, and I got an apartment on Hanover Street, which is like the nicest street in town. And I went manic quite a bit out there. Um, I had extreme paranoia. I thought that my Amazon Echo was listening to my business deals. My car was stolen, and I thought it was the Boston Mafia, and they were out to get me. One time I spilled Sprite in the kitchen, and I went across the street to 7-Eleven, and instead of buying paper towels, I bought 12 copies of the Boston Globe to clean it up. Um, my substance abuse habits had spiraled out of control by that point, and I kind of realized that despite making a really high income, I needed to move back in with my parents and figure out what was going on in my brain. So I moved home, and COVID happened. I went manic and quit my job. I figured there was only one way to address my demons, and that would be to, not have to work and work on myself the whole time. And I pretty much thought that I had done so well in cybersecurity skills that I could get a job easily when I was ready. So I spent the next year completely disassociating from the world. I read 300 pages of literature per day. I cruised through books like Infinite Jest in just 10 days or something like that.
Wow.
I was really, escaping my world and trying to go to someone else's world. And I grew very depressed. I wasn't able to find a job. And on the last day of April in 2021, I tried to take my own life. I put a noose around my neck, and I looked outside, and the clouds parted and the sun came out, and I realized that my good friend was getting married the next day, and I didn't want to ruin that occasion for him. So I went to the wedding, and it's really something when you're struggling. The little things that people do for you, getting you a drink, dancing with you, asking questions. So I was really, glad that I went. And a week later, I was invited to a rugby party, and I hadn't. When I tell you that I stopped playing rugby, I mean I cut out some of my closest friends. Um, and I didn't want to go to this party because I was ashamed of who I was. I had just attempted suicide. I hadn't worked in a year. But I decided to go, in spite of that, you know. Um, and I showed up, and they convinced me to go watch their exhibition match the following week. Our old college coach was now coaching the men's team for them. And so I went there, and I'm in jeans, and I start talking to the coach's wife. I don't really want to talk to anyone. I just want to watch my friends play and go home. But she was a source of confidence in college, and she was encouraging me to play again.
Hmm.
And so when an injury happened with 10 minutes left, I ran onto the field, first time in nearly 5 years. And the first time I touched the ball, I assisted the game-winning score. And so this was, 2 weeks after a suicide attempt. And all of a sudden I had all these new teammates patting me on the back. And, so rugby had filled that void that was missing when I had stopped working. And I worked hard to get back on the field. But I got hurt towards the end of the summer, and serendipitously, the head coaching position for the Eastern Connecticut State University women's rugby team opened up. And that was 8 minutes from my house. So I got the job. It was a week before their season started. They would have had to forfeit the season without a coach. And I had to pass all these different accreditations like rugby training and sexual harassment and stuff like that. But I pulled two all-nighters, and, I made it work before the first game. By this point in my life, I hadn't really had much human connection in 5 years. And now I was basically in charge of creating a community that was inclusive and competitive for 30 college women. But I found that I was a natural at it, and I worked really hard on preparation and, teaching them things that go beyond rugby, life values. And I found that I was pretty good at it. The team wasn't an instant success. We lost to the top team, Tufts University, 31-0 in the regular season. But after that game, I watched film relentlessly and basically pointed out how each player on Tufts played. And, we ended up playing them in the championship, and we beat them 29-10. So this was 6 months after a suicide attempt, and now I was this successful college rugby coach.
Hmm.
Um, we entered the off season. Well, before that, the girls were having so much fun that they wanted to play a tournament in November, and so I paid for their tournament, and I was doing well with cryptocurrency, so I bought them like $3,000 worth of gear and balls and stuff like that. And so I went into the off season. I actually tried to start a cryptocurrency company. It was a decentrally owned and operated rugby team that was governed through NFTs that were given to certain people with certain rugby accreditations. It was basically meant to democratize decision making in a sports organization, so that it wasn't just the head coach making all the decisions. And I got invited to the largest cryptocurrency conference in North America. I pitched my idea to venture capitalists, technologists, even Kimball Musk, Elon Musk's brother. And, the reception was good. I made a lot of great connections out there, but I had gone manic while I was out there from the excitement from drugs. And so I went home and, Maniac can be great for like pitching your idea in a basement because you talk so fast and, you have no inhibition or risk tolerance or, you just feel like God when you're manic. But of course, there's a downside. And when I went home, I trusted this guy online with the secret phrase to my cryptocurrency wallet. He stole $450,000 from me in 15 minutes.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, that was rough. And so the next day, I had to coach the Eastern women's rugby team, and I was still manic, and I was completely distraught. And I was disorganized and disoriented, and I yelled at them for the first time ever. And they had brought three new players, and so this was a really tough time to have my first real screw up. And so I'm called to a meeting with the leadership of the team after that. And one thing that I didn't know was that their old coach had been trying to form a coup to get his job back, and this was the opportunity for some of the leadership people. Um, they called me into this meeting. They just berated me for an hour, didn't really give me an opportunity to talk. And I really didn't understand it. Like, I was so confused. Like, I had saved them from not even having a season, and we won the championship. And I thought a lot of these girls were my friends, and it really shattered me, especially after losing my life savings. And I did something I should have never done. You should never put a young person in this position, but I said if I lose my job, I might kill myself. And the next day, the human resources department opened an investigation into me. And I knew that I hadn't broken any formal like rules of the university, but it was clear that I had lost the support of my team. And so I resigned um, because I didn't want there to be an opportunity for me to get fired and not be able to coach elsewhere.
Hmm.
From there, I basically stayed in bed for 6 weeks, complete suicidal depression. When I would walk my dog, I would see illusions of myself hanging from trees. Um, and it was a really rough period of my life, but it gave way to some mania after about 6 weeks, and I just I figured that it would be embarrassing when my friends found out that I lost my coaching job. So I just got in my car and I drove south. I stopped in Nashville for a week and I played rugby for the Nashville Grizzlies with my college roommate. And that was a really great experience, because I hadn't seen him in a while and I needed a good friend at that point. And while I was down in Nashville, I found a job opening for Memphis Inner City Youth Rugby, which was going to be to coach U19 boys in the most dangerous the most dangerous neighborhood in America, Orange Mound. Orange Mound is the first neighborhood built by the black man for the black man. Um, it it's a tough place, if you Google it every day for the next week, you'll find a different shooting, and you really can't get out of your car at a gas station without a gun on you. But I thought that it would be a good opportunity for me to mentor, youth in a place that really needed it. Um, a lot of these kids had siblings that were in gangs or were incarcerated. And, I thought it would be a step out of my comfort zone and I thought it would be good for me. But, at that time in my life, what I really needed was my support network. And I was moving 1,700 miles away. So I spent 3 weeks down there when I first interviewed for the job, and I loved it. I loved Beale Street. Memphis has an energy that's not like any other place. Um, but then when I moved down there a couple months later, it didn't feel like that. It felt lonely. And on my fourth day there, I woke up with this tremendous panic attack. And at this point, I'd been cycling through medications for the last year. One medication I was on was an early stage trial antipsychotic that made me gay for 3 months. And that was a really tough time because I was wrestling with suicidality while also questioning my sexuality, which had never been, up for debate.
Mhm.
But anyways, this morning when I was having the panic attack, I just started gobbling up 40, 50 pills at a time. Um, and I ended up getting severe serotonin syndrome. I tried to drive home, but I couldn't, and I had to get flown home. And then I was hospitalized for 3 nights. And um, after that, it was a really rough period of my life. You know, my friend who ran a stonemasonry business, kind of had me come to work with him, and I couldn't even listen to him. I couldn't do tasks, but he was great. He didn't care that I was a shell of myself. He didn't care that, um, I wasn't able to follow his directions, and he was losing money on projects, and he was paying me anyways. But it was clear during that month that I needed real help, and so I was institutionalized at the Institute of Living in Hartford. It's a beautiful campus with grassy acres of oak trees and beautiful old buildings. It looks like an old college campus. Um, but of course, when you're an inpatient, you don't get to see the outside at all, really. When you're an inpatient, they do not try to heal you. They try to stabilize your condition so that you're not a threat to yourself or to anybody else. Um, but there really wasn't much to do there. There wasn't much group activity, um, no fitness. I don't even think showers are really available for most of us. Um, I looked around. I saw a lot of people suffering, people that didn't have the things that I was blessed with, like parents with wealth or education. Um, and I was a good-looking athlete, with an inherent sense of confidence. There were schizophrenics, and there was
Mm.
narcissists who would need to be tied down to be given medication. And my roommate had aphasia. Aphasia is when um, you have difficulty with speech because of either head trauma or something of that sort, brain injury. And I actually got him to talk for the first time in several weeks. And, we formed a good relationship. And, it can be a really lonely place, but, that friendship meant a lot to me. So I hope it meant a lot to him. Um, I stayed there for a couple weeks, and eventually I got moved to intensive outpatient, which was a lot of group therapy, and it was a really liberating feeling to walk around the campus and to have a $20 food voucher, and I could eat sugar again. And um, it was, when you're an inpatient, it can feel like prison because you don't really have any freedom or liberty to do what you want. um, but group therapy was so good to me in outpatient. People that struggled like I struggled, and understood what I was going through. And after all of that, I slowly got my life back together. I got a job at the largest cybersecurity company in the world. I worked hard to get back on the rugby field, and by the spring of 2024, I was in the best shape of my life. I was doing things that I had never been able to do, and I was confident that it would be the year that I could show the world what I could do on the rugby field. And my second game, I did it again. I ruptured my patellar tendon. Now, visually, it's a really traumatic injury because your knee goes halfway up your quad. And I knew instantly what had happened. And it was just so devastating after everything I had done to come back from all my, trials and tribulations, to go through that again. And of course, when you're bipolar and you're dealt with trauma, you tend to go manic. And I hadn't gone manic since I had gone to Memphis, a couple of years earlier. Um, and every other time in my life, mania led to just crushing my entire life. Everything that I had worked for, ruined all my relationships, ruined my jobs, everything. But this particular mania was different, because when you are manic, you do have superpowers, right? Are you have increased creativity, curiosity. You're more likely to get things done. Your mind works a million miles per hour, and more than anything, you no longer care what other people think. And so I was just laying in my bed in this full leg cast, hadn't slept in 3 nights, and I just started telling my life story on the notes app on my iPhone and publishing it to Instagram. And it was I had been hiding in the shadows for so long. None of my friends had known what I had been going through, but they always wondered what was going on. I had confused everybody. And so this was my opportunity to, tell my narrative, tell my side of the story. I had to be hospitalized for that manic episode. And I was treated poorly there. The nurse didn't understand mania, and I was just asking for something to put me to sleep because I hadn't slept in 4 nights by that point. And so she locked me alone in a room, and I was just shitting and pissing myself alone for several hours. But eventually, they stuck me with some fentanyl, and I went to sleep. And when I woke up and got out of the hospital, I had just all these messages telling me how inspiring my story is, and friends, strangers, rugby teammates, everybody just showering me with praise. And so that's when I decided to tell my life story.
And that was in 2024.
Yeah,
So just last year. And your book, The Maniac with No Knees, it came out in January of 2025. Was the bestseller, I believe, on Amazon, right, for the whole month, the new
yeah, for the
releases?
first month.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Wow, so many questions though. And so how has your life been since that time, since you decided to publish your memoirs?
Yeah. Well, I'll say a few things to that. You know, the first thing is, I go on all these podcasts, TV shows, I publish a book, and it's connected me with plenty of mentally ill people. And sometimes they might think that I've gotten to the other side of it, right? I beat a lifelong disease, but I still struggle with it every day. I'm stable now, and I have confidence because I'm proud of myself and for what I've achieved. But my substance abuse habits haven't gotten any better. I'm not suicidal, but I still have suicidal thoughts every day. There's a
Mhm.
difference between the two. But you know what? Like, I've built a community on Instagram through my writing that brings me joy, that gives me a goal and a purpose. And, writing is cathartic. And, all therapy really is a mirror for your thoughts. And writing is nothing different. It gives you the opportunity to build your own narrative and set the record straight. And that's important for me because while I was writing the book, I was fired from that job at the largest cybersecurity company because when I had been manic, I sent partner pricing to a customer, which was against the rules. And that sort of thing can happen to a bipolar person, every couple of years. But you know what? With writing, you can take away my job or paycheck, but who's going to take my pen away? Nobody.
Mhm.
I'm my own boss, and it's liberating to have gone from the shadows to become completely authentic with myself and to everyone around me. And I really definitely encourage other people who have struggled um, to not be afraid to share their story because it's a lot harder to struggle in silence than it is to be vocal about it. And it's the only thing that people can do to change things around here. Like my experience in the mental health institution was certainly the turning point for my life, but they could use some help with living situations and activities and stuff like that. So these things are only be brought to awareness if we're willing to talk about it.
Yeah, and so, gosh, all of the questions I had, you just kind of answered. One of the questions was, what does it feel like to be manic? Because you said I went manic and I lost my job. You said that twice. It happened to you at least twice that you went manic and lost your job. And then you explained how you experience mania, which is going to be that increase of energy. And many times people will have that flow and that focus, and they won't care what people think, and they'll go and they'll go and they'll go and they love it. And that seems to be one reason why people don't want medication, is because they don't want a mood stabilizer. They want that high. But what you had said later is that then I crashed and I was in bed for, I think you said, what, 6 weeks?
Mhm.
And that is a perfect example of the manic depressive cycle. And that cycling can be even more rapid than that. But yeah, it's usually about 4 to 6 weeks. And it can be awful if you have to hold down a job. It affects your major life domains like work, relationships. It can affect, like what you said about money. It can affect all kinds of areas of health. And with the substance abuse, that was the other thing I was going to ask. But then you answered the question, is that you still kind of struggle with that. But I know a lot of people with bipolar disorder will try and self-medicate on top of their medications. They'll smoke a little weed, or they'll yeah, they'll do all kinds of different things to try and regulate whatever they're going through, whether it's mania or depression. So you answered that question. The only question I have really that you didn't really answer, well, I have two of them. One is, when you first got your knee injury and then you got the other one, how was that treated? Because you said it was just such an out there amount of odds that you could have even experienced that. So how was that even treated?
Yeah. So basically, your patella, which is your knee, is held in place by, we'll call them rubber bands. And my rubber bands snapped, so it went up. Um, to repair it, you basically drill 3 holes in the patella and you weave the tendon back through it.
Okay. So even though it's rare, it was fixable and you were able to get back on the field.
Yeah, 4.5 years later. But
Mm.
that first injury, I actually recovered from it in a decent manner. Like, I wasn't lifting weights, but I won the town road race and stuff like that, like 13 months later. This time around, it's taken a lot longer. I had to wait for surgery because there was not a orthopedic surgeon around that could do it. And also, I'm, about 33 years old now. So, it's been a burden for healing, but we're slowly getting there.
Yeah. And then you said it happened again and you knew what it was because it went halfway up your leg. Your
Yeah.
your patella just kind of flew up into your leg.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I kind of cringed a little bit there. And the other question, I should have put a trigger warning about that one, but that's okay. The other question I have is, you mentioned the levels of care, which is inpatient, which is just about stabilization. And I don't know if you did like a residential program. You did say you went through intensive outpatient. So there's a nice little picture of what treatment looks like if you
Yeah, there's
actually
three
go through.
tiers for me.
Yeah, okay, so you did do those 3 tiers. So then did you, and the 4th tier is gonna be outpatient therapy with a licensed mental health counselor like myself, and so I don't know, and also psychiatric management, which
Mhm.
maybe a lot of people with bipolar just do, because some, psychiatrists will actually do a little bit of therapy along with the prescription medications, seeing how you're doing and charting your moods and stuff like that. So I'm just wondering if you're continuing to go to an outpatient program or
Um,
a therapist.
yeah, I do. I talk to both my therapist and my psychiatrist regularly, and it is helpful. You know,
Mhm.
it's definitely good to talk. It's certainly not the only thing that you need, right? Um, you know,
Yeah, yeah, and I'm glad that you said you have both, because and both of those, the therapist and the psychiatrist, should be coordinating your care. You should have releases. They should be talking about if you are having problems. And so that is wonderful, because the theme of May Mental Health Awareness Month is putting awareness into action. And that means seeking treatment if necessary. And I think you had enough people who were concerned about you. And also, I guess, well, the first time you had that whole like gulping down of all the medications, and they had to fly you to a treatment center in Connecticut. And so
Hmm.
that was a forced recovery, but I guess really needed. I guess a last and final question is if you can tell us any kind of skills or tools you use on the days that you are struggling, because you say you still struggle, and everybody, even people who don't have a diagnosed mental illness or a mental health condition, we struggle too. Conditions happen in our lives that cause chaos, and we do struggle. But I wonder what you do when you struggle just being a person with bipolar disorder.
Yeah, I'll give you an example, then I'll mention the three things I think that are necessary to have. Um, while I was writing the book last summer, I was in a relationship, and um, it ended pretty poorly with a drug overdose that nearly killed them. Um, and it was a really one of the toughest periods of my life. Um, you know, it it shattered me for a long time, and I still get terrible nightmares about it. But something, having the book to work on and focus on every day um, really pushed me along. Right, I had a goal in mind, and I didn't want the other thing to burden my chances of publishing a book and things like that.
Mhm.
So that kind of attests to the first of three things that I say someone with a mental illness needs to get back together, and that's goals, right? That was a good example of a goal that pushed someone along in a time of need. The second is community, right? For me, it's rugby. I still go to rugby even though I'm injured, and I can feel like myself around them. I can have something to do on nights where I might want to be disassociated, and it brings me confidence and laughter and friendship. Writing's become a community, like I mentioned, and that brings me a lot of confidence too. And then the third thing, which we've already mentioned, is medication, right? Medication can be tough to diagnose for a psychiatric illness. I went through an awful cycle before I did manage to find the right medication, but I did find it. And, it's not perfect. There's still side effects that I deal with. And there's 5 different medications that I'm on right now, at least.
Mhm.
Um, but you know what? Like, I'm able to live a more stable life, and, I'm able to do things that I once never dreamed about. So,
Mhm.
you know,
Nice. Well, thanks for sharing that. And I'm just going to go ahead and flash the overlay here. This is the cover of the book. I don't know who designed it, but it's super compelling. And then you can go to Tyler's website at www.tylerkania.com and you can order it. It's on Amazon, and it's compelling. And he has just kind of scratched the surface
yeah.
of this. So that is actually the book. And then you have your Instagram too, which I think if you just go onto his Instagram page, is that where you keep some of your other writing?
So yeah, I mean, like, Instagram brought me a community behind my writing, and after I finished the first draft on Instagram, I started writing short stories and essays. I write one or two every day. I'm in the process of building a second book called 99 Stories in a Broken Pen. They're all one-page stories, so they're kind of tailored to that.
Hmm.
The attention span on Instagram. But they're good for people that maybe doesn't read so much, and doesn't want to read a full chapter. So every day I publish something to my Instagram, a story or an essay, and it's a great place for me to interact with people who want to learn more. Yeah.
Great. So check out Tyler. Is it at Tyler, for those of you who can't see the screen on YouTube, at TYLER_KANIA, and that's on Instagram. That sounds really cool because you're right. Some people don't have that attention span, but if you can put a story on like say what a Word document or one of those notes documents and just put it on one page, it's completely doable in maybe 5-10 minutes, right?
Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
mean, people love them. I have probably 300 regular users, reading my book reading my stuff every day between social media. And yeah, it's good for me as a writer because every sentence has to really have a purpose when you're doing one page stories. So it's made me better for sure.
That's fantastic. We do appreciate you being here today, Tyler. I appreciate you and the journey that you've been on. And again, for those of you who are interested in his book, The Maniac with No Knees, go to www.tylerkania, one word.com, and you'll be glad you did. Well, he did not tell everything. There are other things in the book, and I'm going to grab a copy myself, I think, because you've really interested me. And thank you for being a participant in Mental Health Awareness Month. I hope it extends for everybody beyond the month of May. All right. So again, thank you very much for being here on Calming the Chaos podcast.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Calming the Chaos podcast. If you found this podcast interesting or helpful, please like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. You can also go to www.calmingthechaospodcast.com to listen to all Calming the Chaos podcast episodes. I look forward to sharing my next podcast episode with you. In the meantime, take care.